Hello and welcome to the Testing Peers. Tonight we're going to talk about persuasion, techniques around how we persuade others, our experience with good and bad persuasion, and anything else that comes to mind. Tonight I'm joined by friends, fellow peers, David.
Hello.
Chris.
Hey.
And Russell.
Aloha.
And as always, we are sponsored by Saffron QA. Saffron QA are specialists in testing recruitment, and they provide a range of bespoke recruitment services to organisations across the UK. For further details about Saffron QA, please see the show notes or visit saffronqa.co.uk. I believe I'm handing over to Russell for banter tonight.
You are indeed. So, considering when we record this is usually in the evenings, I've got a really bizarre one I was thinking about today, and earlier conversations made me think of this. What's your favourite breakfast, people? What would you have on the ideal morning to get you started for the day?
I was not expecting breakfast.
Exactly.
Always expect the unexpected.
Wow, that is true.
I'm weird. What can I say?
For me, I like a bit of porridge, actually. I put fruit or dry fruit and nuts and things with it, but yeah, mostly porridge because it fills me up and sets me ready for the day.
Do you have something with it?
Just a cup of tea.
Earl Grey?
No, just breakfast, English breakfast, and with milk. And no sugar if you're making me one.
Is the milk first or is the tea going first?
Oh, no, we're making it in the mug, so it's tea bag and then milk after, before it stews too much.
My usual breakfast is cornflakes with banana and a little dribble of honey on top with semi-skim milk. But, you know, if I'm treating myself, I might have a crumpet or two as well. Instead of maybe not be that greedy, but
what do you have on the crumpets?
Just butter. Maybe occasional little bit of jam, but yeah, mainly just butter. And again, cup of tea. Tea in the morning, and then coffee later in the morning.
Interesting.
And are you also a milk first, or are you
I'm same as you. Tea bag first, and yeah, don't have a teapot, so otherwise I would probably do it that way.
Chris?
Yeah, well, my daily breakfast on a work day looks different to what it looks like on other days. I have a little Lactimel probiotic drinky thingy and a yogurt, and I have some sort of breakfasty biscuity type things, and that is my breakfast. And then I start my drinking with coffee, black, and then tea for the rest of the day, and the tea bag, water, then milk in that order. And that's what I have during any working day, whether I've been in the office or whether I've been at home. I've had the same breakfast throughout. Some of my old colleagues think that's incredibly boring and predictable. Wait to hear about my lunchtime in the future sometimes. If I'm having like an ideal breakfast, that's a kind of a different thing. Because I think probably I'd like sort of those thick, fluffy pancakes with syrup and bacon and things along those lines. That's kind of delicious, but I generally can't be bothered to make that sort of thing. So that'd be sort of like an eat out breakfasty type thing. I'm also partial to a croissant, I'll be honest.
What about you, Russell?
Probably my favourite, if I had to just if I could do anything I wanted just for the sake of it, I'd probably go for a bacon sandwich and kind of a bread bun. But I'd probably grill the bread bun a little bit first. No sauce or anything on it because I'm kind of not a saucy guy. I like my things quite plain. So I'd probably have that, and it'd be really crispy, probably like a smoked bacon of some sort. Quite a nice bacon is probably what I'd go for. And then I'd have a nice coffee, proper filtered sort of coffee type thing on the side with milk. And I would be very, very happy. Fortunately, I don't have the time to do that every day. So I end up just with cereal, but hey.
What cereal do you have?
Granola, sort of cereal every morning with a coffee. So that's how we start the day. That's how we're going to start our episode.
Persuasion, then. It's a difficult thing to describe, but what do you understand? What would you say are the traits of persuasion?
Should we start more back to, I guess, the context in which we're talking about persuasion? So are we persuading people to on board with our ideas, do what we want, to kind of change their behaviors, to adapt to different situations? Or is it all the above?
I guess it's all of the above, but the characteristics of persuasion generally, I mean, yes, they might manifest in slightly different ways depending on what you're trying to achieve, but persuasion as a whole is the characteristics generally tend to be the same, right?
Well, there are things, but then there's like mitigating factors like motivation, outcomes, who it benefits. Maybe if you're in some organizations where politics is played, trade-offs, and even hierarchy and the way things look, or even how long you've been in an organization. When you're new, you may need to introduce yourself in a particular way, bring a bit more proof that you are worth doing stuff than maybe if you've got some more sort of established behaviors and track record stuff behind you.
I think it does depend on what you are trying to persuade. If, as Chris says, if you're persuading someone to give you a job, or to give you responsibility on a project, that's very different to trying to persuade someone to release money for a project or for a new thing. In that respect, what I usually do in trying to get money or some support for a particular thing is to first of all highlight the problem, highlight the issue that you're trying to fix. So rather than just giving them the answer, the solution, and then allowing them or asking them why do we need to do this, if you give them the why you feel you need to do it first of all, and then offer them the solution and say, can we do it, or something like that, then actually they should hopefully have far less questions because you've already thought through the process. And so that might well then allow you to actually get or persuade them that your idea is a good one in the first place.
I think you're right, David. I think sometimes it comes down to, for me personally, rather than trying to tell them what their problem is, I think it's, working to understand what their problem is from them, get them to voice their problems, and then find a way to almost sell what you're trying to give them in a way that shows that it helps to solve the issue they've got. But you're right, it's definitely about contextualizing it with the problem first, and then go in for the sales pitch in a way that they get it and they want to buy into it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because persuading people isn't really just getting people to do what you want them to do. In fact, it's often far from that. Often it's around like problems and solutions, and bringing about change is often a thing, and convincing people to change can be difficult because a lot of us are quite comfortable in the way that we've been. I think we've all seen organizations that are doing things they've always done them and find change quite a difficult thing to invest. I've seen conversations recently around personal development where changing the way people have either time or money budgeted for the personal development is a tricky one, and people sometimes ask for measures of success beyond just your typical I spend this much time and you get this ROI. Sometimes it's quite difficult to put those things into words, and so you feel like you're becoming a salesman or something. But I think one of the keys to persuasion probably is to have allies, have other people who sort of are on board with what you're trying to achieve early doors. Maybe you come up with the ideas together rather than just one person. That's probably a good thing. And then together you can then sort of either organically or plan how you're going to sort of persuade and pitch ideas going forwards.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that having the allies bit is definitely key. Having people that can vouch for what you're trying to sell or trying to bring in to solve the problem. And that's where doing it the second time is always easier than doing it the first, because if it's a new idea that you're trying to, or a new thing you're trying to bring in and solve a problem, you don't have those allies to start with. You've got your reputation as your, and what people think of you previously and what you've achieved previously is always the only real thing you have at that point. But yeah, once you've done it once, you can then use that. You've got allies within the business to then help you sell the problem again, or solve the problem again.
I think that's always a difficulty, actually, if you're coming into a organization or are fairly new, especially in management, then actually you don't have that track record. You don't have that evidence that actually what you say is legitimate or can be understood. And so actually the art of persuasion is more of a difficult thing, I think, until you've actually got that evidence that you are able to do and perform what you actually are trying to do.
I guess in those cases, you've got to try and use different techniques to kind of get people to kind of come on board with you. If you mentioned before, making allies is one of those techniques, then how do you make those allies? Chris mentioned about getting people to come up with ideas with you. Collaboration, getting people to generate the solutions themselves, sort of coaching people versus kind of getting them to kind of do what you tell them. It's very easy as a leader sometimes to instruct, whereas in reality, if you want to persuade someone that your idea is good, telling them your idea is good is probably going to have the exact opposite equation. Now, I believe that if you want to persuade people, you need to show confidence, because if you're not sure what you're selling, then pretty much most people won't buy into it. But there's a difference between confidence and cocky. And if you can kind of show that you're confident and you can kind of encourage others to come up with the ideas, tell them the problems, and then let them generate ideas and nudge them along the way, you can help steer things subtly. I don't mean too underhand, but, like, what's the pros of that? What could go wrong with that perhaps? Rather than you telling them, that won't work because. As soon as you start going into that won't work, you become sort of this negative voice.
It sounds like you'd work quite well on The Apprentice as a coach somehow, Russell. I think there's a lot of people there that are very confident but don't really work well as teams, do they?
Yeah.
But there's also a thing that comes from that idea, which is, who are you trying to persuade? What's the context and the history of the situation that you're trying to persuade people to change from or get on board with? And like, is that someone that's notoriously difficult, or are they quite hard? Like, you need to understand personalities and politics and history in order to better apply yourself. You can't just come in and change stuff or persuade people from stuff without. You could tarnish relationships and reputations by doing that badly from the get-go, couldn't you?
I think what you all said is absolutely true. But again, as we said in other podcasts, one size doesn't fit all. You need to sort of tailor what you're actually looking for and who you're trying to persuade and what the reason is, based on the situation at that particular time. The other thing I would say is that as part of the art of persuasion is to also listen to feedback and to potentially compromise. You can go in with a big idea and actually they go, it takes too long, too much money, etc. So therefore you can then compromise and go, well, why don't we just try this little bit of it? And if it's a success, and again, that can build your confidence that actually what you say you deliver. And so therefore next time they might give you a bit more time or a bit more money in order to actually complete the idea.
I'm a big fan of this idea of experimenting. And yeah, to persuade people, if you can do little low cost things, it can often be a good way to make something that is hypothetical in your head real, and change it from this kind of piece of paper strategy, change your idea into something tangible that people can buy into. But yeah, it is a good thing.
And I think that also, as you say, something tangible, give a demonstration. And you said not being cocky, but actually if you've got, especially if you're new, if you've got evidence that it's worked in a similar way or in similar circumstances, then you can certainly use that as evidence, which again can give other people confidence.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I think the thing for me is there isn't like you say, David, there's not a one size fits all. And the key is the art of persuasion comes down to adapting your style depending on the situation, depending on the person. If you're going into the set, you're going into different situations with the same tactic and the same thing that you're trying to sell, you're going to get very different responses depending on the circumstances. So it's, not necessarily selling the same thing each time, but finding a way to persuade them in the way that works for them. And the key thing there is speaking the language of the person you're trying to persuade. If it's a senior manager that you're going to, talk about it in terms of ROI, talk about it in terms of the benefit to the company or the benefit to their organization. If it's someone in your team you're trying to persuade on something, talk about their development, talk about their way of their growth, their opportunities. It's finding a way that's going to trigger the motivation for them to want to be involved and the motivation for them to see the benefits through. And if you can do that in an effective way and then follow it up with, once you've persuaded them, actually delivering on what you've said, then you have an ally then. And once you've got those allies in place, you'll find it a lot easier to move forward.
Have you got any examples of where there's been something you've had to do that required persuading people? Have you got any examples of from your actual experience where we can sort of talk through what we went through, what worked, what didn't, useful tips rather than just sort of talking theoretically? Have we got some good examples of where we've had to do something like this before?
I have. I could talk through some of the cultural quality stuff I've tried in the past that's been successful. I think I've mentioned before about the project manager that was really difficult in one of the roles where I tried to convince him but it was a case of listening to their frustrations, taking time to calm down once the frustrations on my side had died down, and then going back to him with a plan of, okay, I can see why you've got these frustrations, but here's what I propose. Here's how I think we can move forward. Here's how it can benefit your project and reduce costs at a later stage by having us involved earlier. And once I could get time, once he got all the emotion out of his system, once I could take time to talk him through the benefits and the reduced costs, because we weren't going to be needing to run a 4-week regression run at the end, he slowly came on board. It wasn't a fast process. He still had his doubts, but he allowed us that opportunity to try it out. And once we tried it out and he saw the benefit and we got things raised earlier, and it is one of those things that I would then have regular coffee meets with him to check, how are we progressing? Are you okay with this? Just to make sure we were still on track and make sure he was still happy. Because at any point he could have pulled the plug. But it was a case of keeping him close, keeping him sweet, and then working to deliver what we promised we would be able to deliver. And when we delivered it at the end of the project, we not have to have a 4-week regression cycle. We had a sanity check once everything was in, because we've been doing regression as we went along. The feedback afterwards was, yeah, absolutely agree, it's the right way to do this. Let's do this for future projects. And then you've got that person, the PM, that can go to other PMs in the business and say, we've tried this model out with testing, think you should try it, go and speak to Simon. And then suddenly lots of people banging my door down saying, right, we've heard you can reduce costs. It puts a lot of onus on you to get it right. And, it's not always as effective as it was for that one project. But once you've got that first example, you can then move forward. So that's what happened for me with that one example. I have others, but I'll give other people a chance to talk.
An example I've got was for replacing a rather expensive bit of hardware that we had. And so this goes back to my first point of coming up with the problem. So basically it was getting old, it was obsolete, the calibration wasn't good, it was sort of held together by sticky tape, and every so often it would go wrong and have a long downtime, which affected obviously the ability to actually do the work with it. So from that particular point, I then had to persuade the management in order to invest in a better model, which is quite considerable amount of money, by recognizing the problem and then explaining the virtues of actually replacing it, and replacing it not necessarily like for like, but allowing different levels. So therefore we had one expensive one and then a couple of sort of cheaper ones in order to allow for greater granularity and also work on other projects. So it's making sure that there is a clear picture, and we were able to successfully, progress with that and purchase the new models.
I was thinking about one where it wasn't my idea that I ended up having to persuade people to. So I guess I was an ally, where I had a boss who had seen some work that I'd done, liked it, and thought this was something that could scale and work on different sites with different people. And so again, probably they were doing quite a good job of enabling me and coaching me into doing bigger and grander things than I ever had the vision to do. But I ended up, without really realizing it, in a proof of concept for an automation rig meeting with heads of department from several different regional areas around Europe, all watching my demo. So I had to give a nice, simple presentation and stuff to sort of prove that I'd thought about this and talk about the benefits of scalability, maintainability, all these good things, talk about good practices with the automation and how I'd thought about how this would work. And all of that came across. Now, the tech demo was a complete and utter failure. Nothing worked at all. But all the work, the belief, all the background stuff that I had done, the way that it came out of me, the belief in the stuff that I was doing, was enough that they believed in me. They gave me budget, they gave me time, they gave me headcount, they gave me the ability to go and recruit external folk to get on board for projects and stuff. And that kind of blew me away, because if I'm honest, I was trying to sell an idea without actually knowing how it was going to look. And even in that meeting, I didn't have a clue, but I just believed in those things. And the questions they asked me were never granular about ROI. They were never about how many people do you need. It was all about, can you solve this problem? Is this possible with your solution? Will these things work? And I was able to back that up with my experience, my knowledge, with the proof of the pudding where I had been. And that, in some ways, was enough to bring people on board with that as well. It was horrific. I cannot tell you a time when I've sweated more in my entire life. And when it failed, the tech demo, I don't think I've ever been more mortified in my life. And I'm a man who failed his driving test 5 times.
I think the majority of you, from what I kind of read in your situations there, you were persuading people kind of above you, generally speaking, or to the side of you, to do something that you wanted them to do, to give you money, to let you change the way the project work, things like that. So I'm going to try and give a different example, just because I like to be awkward and odd. So persuading your team to do something. So I've recently been involved in kind of a different process, and there's a team forming around a certain problem where I'm working currently. And one of the things that team was dramatically lacking was someone to actually lead the Scrum ceremonies. We would call them a Scrum Master. It's very simple, following Scrum, but there wasn't anyone really in that role given that title. And that meant lots of people like myself butting in, getting involved in things and all the rest of it, as happens. If there's a void, lots of people jump in. Anyway, that's the background. So I needed to get someone to be a Scrum Master. I wanted someone to be a Scrum Master. I actually wasn't that cared who, as much as it was somebody. I cared who it shouldn't be. So it shouldn't be me, it shouldn't be senior leader. I wanted it to be one of the team. So I got some of the team leads together and tried to kind of gave a couple of names, got them to give some names, and there was a bit of a divide between the teams at the time. So it was working with them to kind of come up with, well, who's going to be a good person in our teams? Do this. Who's got the strengths? Who's got the support? Who can we do? Who's got the persuasion of people? So it was talking them through the decision-making process in order to get the team to a consensus. That wasn't me telling them who it was going to be. It happened to be the person I had in my mind at the end, but I was also went in there fully accepting it could be anybody else. But with talking, we persuaded that A, we needed it, B, who would be there, C, who could support them. So, that was in my head a way of persuading the team, but it came from discussing it openly and by nudging them into different directions and thinking about consequences. What will someone's feelings be? We make it somebody else. What will, is this person, do they know Scrum well? Those sorts of things, asking open questions and getting the team to discuss it as a group to come to a consensus that solved a problem, but also got the group of leaders who were part of the challenge, and I include myself in that, should be clear, to come to some understanding. And we did. We left there with everyone on one page for once. And it was the first time in that project for a while, I think, that we've been on one page. So I think that's sort of a good example of kind of the other side of this sort of stuff.
I think you highlight a good point there, actually, that I think communication is really important. And also another thing you mentioned was questions. We can use questioning skills incredibly powerfully when we're trying to persuade people. And often, to a certain extent, almost the best questions to ask are those really closed questions where you either have a yes or a no. And if you're very quick at being able to give questions where they always get the right answer, then actually you can persuade people quite quickly, although that can be quite quite confrontational to a certain extent. So you need to be careful of that particular part of that.
There's a theory, and I can't remember who it's by, it's going to annoy me now, I'll try and find it for the show notes. But if you kind of get someone to say yes 3 times in a row quite quickly, that the fourth question, no matter whether they agree or not, they're more likely to say yes. Statistically speaking, regardless of their actual belief, they'll say yes because they've got into the habit of saying yes. So I'll try and find out where that's from.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I've certainly never actually had a particular tactic for persuading people. And I actually worry that if I had ever been taught tricks for persuading people, that I might have sort of distracted myself from the purpose of what I was trying to do by trying to follow these sorts of practices and top tips for persuading people. I've always kind of tried, well, certainly I don't want to persuade people on things that I don't believe in myself anyway, but I've always tried to sort of come forward with as much sort of humility as I can do, rather than like blowing my own trumpet and saying how wonderful this thing is. It's like, doesn't this sound like something that's kind of worthwhile? To me, this looks like this is something good. I kind of find that persuasion works when you meet people wherever they are, whether they're higher than you, lower than you, same level, and it's a conversation. It's something. It doesn't feel like I'm in a persuasion state. It's very much, I'm passionate about something, I believe in something, but it's not a forced thing. And now I may be in a situation where it's explicitly a state where I'm supposed to be selling an idea, evangelizing, I think some people like to use. But for me, I think the long-term gain of actually believing in something and having that credibility and humility with people has a much greater chance of success in the long run. And it makes me feel more comfortable because I'm not a salesman. And I if I was doing something that made me feel highly uncomfortable and I couldn't change my mindset to the point where I was comfortable, then I don't think I'd ever be able to persuade anyone. So I've kind of got, it's something that I'm keen on. I'd love it if you were keen on it too. Let's go from there. Find that common ground sort of thing.
Yeah, I think going with the what you were saying about not taking tips from others. One person told, I can't remember who it was now, but someone told me a long time ago about being bold when you're trying to be persuasive. And, I'd never really followed up with that. I'd always been a little bit more sort of nervous about, not asking for too much or not trying to do too much or not trying to promise too much. Or even, whether it's going to your team and trying to persuade them on their next steps for their career or a project or et cetera, to going up to the senior leadership board or whatever else to try and talk about, headcount or whatever else. But then one time came around and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try it. And it was a couple of years ago. I was trying to get, actually no, it was 12 months ago, just over a year ago. I was trying to get more heads in my team. And I worked it all out, best case, what, really, if I could have everything I wanted, there's 11 new heads I want. And I knew that was bold. I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere near that, but I knew that if I could get guaranteed to get one head, that would be an improvement on what I had. So I went with I'm going to go for 11, and anything I get will be a bonus. And that the story was bought into. They really got the journey that I was trying to take the team on, and they said, you know what, we really support this. We'd love to give you everything, but we can't give you everything right now. Here's funding for 3, which I'm thinking, great, it's 3 more than I thought I'd get. So, sometimes it pays to be bold, but also trying to sort of push more than you're expecting, and actually have a lower expectation of what you're going to get at the outcome. Sometimes at the back end of that is worthwhile, but it's don't go bold if you've got nothing to back it up. You need to have ways to prove that what you're asking for is.
Yeah, don't try and persuade someone to give you $1 million for your next salary just because you want to.
Yes,
perhaps.
I mean, if you do find a technique of making that work, then please share away. But yeah.
One thing I was going to ask was, we've concentrated a lot on us being the persuader, but we mentioned earlier about having allies. So how do we change our tactics when we're the allies rather than the actual instigator for the persuasion?
Good question. I mean, I find if someone has come to me with an idea that they think I'll be on board with, that's in some ways a compliment, I guess. That's quite nice. But also, in some ways, it kind of feels easier because it's not my idea. It's already somebody else's idea. So it's already easier than if it was just my idea. And then all those sorts of things about being able to support and bounce off each other and do those things. That's a really exciting time, actually. And it is true when you're trying to find an ally and you find someone and those things happen. But to be in that situation as someone that's been approached to be an ally with things, I find those bits quite re-energizing, especially if you've been in an organization for a while and maybe you're feeling a little bit stagnant, or you've been there for a while, you've only been able to achieve so much, and your energy levels maybe are sunk a little bit, and some new life gets breathed in by new people coming into projects or new people coming into the organization, and they've come to you to sort of you kind of bounced off. That can be really energizing and exciting, and to be able to encourage people and offer to help people sort of achieve their vision or to get other people on board, for me is, I think, possibly more rewarding than coming across with my own ideas and bringing people on board with me, in the same way as I kind of find people that I've helped in whatever way achieving their goals in many ways feels a lot easier for me to process in my head their success and celebrate that than stuff that I've done myself, if that makes any kind of sense.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, I think one thing is, especially if it's someone from your team, you've empowered them to try and come forward and bring these ideas. If you then can buy into what they're trying to sell and help them push it forward as an ally, then there's a great satisfaction in that you not only have you improved the overall process or whatever it was that's going forward, but you've improved that person because you've given them the opportunity to come up with an idea. You've then backed them. You've given them self-confidence. They're now feeling empowered. That then has a knock-on effect on the rest of your team as well, because that person goes back into the team feeling more encouraged and nurtured, and that can rub off on some of the team members. They can start saying, if you've got some great ideas, you need to go and talk to Simon because he can really help you to shape it and move it forward. And suddenly you've got a team that want to be empowered, which goes back to what we've talked about on one of our very first episodes. But it's all linked, and if you can as an ally help with that persuasion piece and help persuade others that this is a good idea, then it can really have a positive effect on your whole group.
One thing I would say is that if people come to you, then don't, again, it's communication, and again, it's giving them, feeding into their enthusiasm and encouraging them, but don't try and sort of make the idea yours. Don't try and change the idea too much so that, yes, I can see your vision and I think it could go in this direction. Let them drive it, because they came up with the idea, they've got their own vision, let's give them their confidence. Let's empower them in order to prove themselves, so therefore they can be a bit more persuasive next time.
I agree. I think the one thing to be cautious of there is, if there is holes in their idea, then be open with them, be constructive, try and help them solve the holes by thinking of other options. But like you say, don't then railroad it with your own ideas to plug the gaps. That's where you identify the holes in their problem, give them some coaching to work out what the problem is, but still empower them to come up with a solution. And work with them if necessary, but as you say, don't railroad over it and suddenly change it to fix the holes, but make it more your idea.
Yeah, we fit a lot in that time. And there was, I mean, I think we could probably discuss these things forever in a day, but thankfully we have come to an end for today, listeners, and thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for the great conversation again, you three, and thank you to our great sponsors, Saffron QA. If you found us, thank you for listening. Please give us feedback on the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. If you wish to support us financially, you can find us on Patreon. But otherwise, please join us again next time.
For now, it's goodbye from the testing peers.
Goodbye.